one of the, I guess, beneficiaries of a lot of video training. I think she's watched tons of videos about like what we're doing here. But hopefully now in the future we have real experts. So today I'm introducing Jason Silver, who is who's an executive searcher, right? You look for executives to fulfill slots in different companies.
Correct. An
And
executive search professional. Yes, sir.
executive search professional. You have your own company now.
I do.
Okay.
It's called the Silver Project Group, and so we work mainly with startups that are looking to sort of grow, and sort of growth-oriented companies that need to figure out how to put into place one of their first hiring plans, or think about hiring a little bit more strategically at the beginning of a company's growth rather than thinking about it reactively. So
Okay.
being in the technology industry, and then most recently at Airbnb, have gained a lot of exposure to the startup, the VC, and the growth company, or the growth phase company space.
Got it. And previously you worked 4 years at LinkedIn too as well, yeah?
That's right.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So I'll also preface this with a little bit. We're not looking specifically for any like detailed information on Airbnb or LinkedIn because I
Mhm.
know that can be sensitive. But more, it's just around general principles of how to hire and when to hire and how
Mhm.
like to build a good team. Okay, so that's actually what you just said. Sort of sparks a really uh, interesting question, which was I felt like executive search could be a little bit like chicken and the egg, and what you just mentioned with VCs also comes in. So, like, I've spoken with a few investors, and this idea of like what's supposed to come first? Are you supposed to get your executives first, or do you get your funding first? Because I feel like you might need the funding to get the executive, and then you might need the executive to get the funding. So, based on your experience, what is the correct time to actually start thinking about building your executive team?
I mean, the correct time to think about building an executive team is early on. 100%, you need to have eyes on that, and you need to build really solid bench strength, as well as a vision and a plan for a robust executive team from the outset. Because investors are not going to invest in a company that doesn't have a plan, or a solid idea about who they want to bring on, the type of talent that they want to bring on, and how that aligns with the growth of your company, the growth of your product, what have you. And so I think talent and product need to kind of work, or like walk in lockstep and together in parallel, if you will. Um, but then conversely, you need to be able to pay these individuals, and hence you need funding, you need a source of revenue in order to, pay for these salaries. And earlier stage companies can rely on things like equity to help, buoy that compensation package a little bit. And you're going to have to find people that are willing to take chances and be a little bit risky with startups, because that's the name of the game with startups is risk taking. And nobody ever said joining a startup was a safe bet. So I think that those are two things to think about. And you do bring up a good point. It is chicken and egg. There's no really right time to do one versus the other. I think they both have to be working in tandem.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that's a pretty solid explanation, and I've had this philosophy actually, and perhaps it's maybe now I'm kind of looking at it differently, which is I've always thought like you begin with like the core team that you need in order to run the business, and then
Mhm.
you try to kind of promote from within to see who would reach those roles. Um, Taking that versus let's say building, let's say from a group of people who are domain experts already. What do you think about that? Like a sort of internal versus an external hiring strategy.
I think both work. I think both work at different stages of a company's growth. Earlier on, it's a lot easier to grow internal talent and bring people along into roles that are successively more senior and take on more responsibility if that person's capable. I think it's the smart move early on in a company's evolution is to look at how internals can continue to grow and develop. And that's a really key retention strategy for companies that want to retain their top talent, is allowing them to take on more responsibilities and bigger roles over time. And so I think that is a really important plan to have. But once you grow to a certain size, and every company's size is slightly different in regards to their market and their industry and their product, your investors, depending on how involved they are, will want to see subject matter expertise being sort of instituted in an organization. And so, I'll take Airbnb, for example. You know, when you were there, Jane, as well as me being there in 2018 through 2020, the people that were in really senior roles had been with the company for a really long time, probably since the inception of the company. So while that's great, our investors, and as the company had sought to go public, you want to reassure the public, the people that are going to buy your stock, that you have the right people in place to lead your company for the next 3, 5, 10 years. So Airbnb ended up doing a lot of hiring from very large, well-established companies like Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, companies like that, where the individuals we're hiring have a reputation, understand how to do this in a larger context, and can take that subject matter expertise from their own companies and really grow that at Airbnb. So does that make a bit of sense?
Yes, it certainly does. I think I remember the actually I remember seeing this from the employee perspective, which was, I think the buzzword at the time was, yeah, we need more adult supervision, right? And
Yeah.
it was a little bit controversial too. But this is actually why I'm coming to you, Jason, as well, to see it from. I've realized, like, being an employee and being an executive is very different experiences, and you can see very differently the perspective of why the company is choosing to take certain decisions.
Hmm.
And this is where I also I have a follow up question, which is, like, actually, in the early history of my company, we brought in very senior talent, and it ended up being quite traumatic for us in this way, because what happened was that, I guess, we brought in this person. They were very senior, and they worked here for a little bit, but eventually one of our partners and this person eventually worked together, and so we lost a partner, and we sort of lost a key account, and the executive went to work on that side. It didn't last very long, but we sort of, like, thought, okay, this this became troublesome because there was such a big cultural gap. And then I remember back to my days at Airbnb about, like, you can't fuck up the culture, right? So then I realized senior people have a huge amount of cultural weight because they become the leaders of that particular division. And so
Hmm.
my question is then, um, I know it's very hard to even find executive talent, not to mention executive talent that has a culture fit. So in sort of, like, your experience, like, is that achievable, like, on a perfect basis? Can you get you need the executive, you need the timing, you need the culture fit, you need the experience, you need that. And do you see, like, where do you prioritize, I guess, in sort of the executive fit? Like, do you prioritize, we're just going to take a little bit longer and find the right person, or we're going to find somebody maybe with potentially a little bit less context, but they have more culture, or, like, how do you see it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, the way that I've handled executive search in talent acquisition as a whole, it's really tough to find somebody who checks all the boxes, no matter what. Finding that perfect person is very rare, basically impossible. And so what you have to realize is go through a prioritization exercise to understand what are the things that are most critical to your company right now. Is it somebody that can help shape the culture? Is it somebody that needs to scale a product? Is it somebody that needs to take on a large team right now? Like those are the aspects. So the executive that you need to hire, needs to be appropriate for the time and the place of the company right now, because an executive right now might not be the right executive for 5 years from now. And executives tend to, put themselves in boxes saying that they prefer to work in earlier stage companies, or they prefer to work in growth stage companies, or later stage companies where they're just sort of scaling certain things, like certain aspects of a product. So executives tend to pinpoint where they excel, and that hopefully can help you align with the person you're looking for and the stage of the company. What me personally, investors believe in a product, but they also believe in the core team. So, they are investing because the product, the service is excellent and it's good, and there's a market fit there. So they will invest in that. And then it is up to the company to build the team around the product and the industry and how you want to shape your organization ultimately. Now, the term that I bring up a lot, we don't talk about culture fit as much as we say culture add. So, I think culture add is something that we think about because culture is something that's continuously evolving. It's changing all the time. And by adding one new person in, it's going to change it just a little bit. And so culture fit to me makes it seem like we're fitting people into a box. And that reduces the amount of folks that we think can actually fit into that box, whereas we're changing what the box looks like by adding somebody into the fold, really. And so I think that is a way to think about bringing on a more diverse team, a team that can have different perspectives.
Right.
And so culture add is something that I like to think about, but it's really up to, when we think about hiring executives, I think it depends on the stage of the company. I think it's what sort of gaps are they going to fill? Can they be a culture add? Are they not going to take anything away from the culture, but can they give us something extra to help, shape that culture going forward? And I think that is sort of how I would answer that question. There's probably some other thoughts that I have, but I think that's probably a good start.
Okay. And on that particular sort of notion, I kind of want to branch again, which was, I remember very specifically, like at Airbnb when I was talking to people at HR, and you'd ask, okay, why did this person not get hired? Why did this person get hired? It was commonly around this idea of culture fit, right? Like they would say,
Yeah.
we're basing our decisions on this person would get along here. Do you see sort of like, I mean, of course I guess it's obvious, but do you see sort of, is culture add something specifically different from executive hires from regular hires, or is it just like a evolution of the culture fit philosophy?
I don't know if it is totally different from executive to sort of non-executive roles. I do think there is a greater weight put on culture add and culture fit when it does come to executives because of the role that they play, because of the teams that they'll own, because of the responsibility that they're given. Many times executives are publicly facing, so they're speaking on behalf of the company. They are sort of like in the branding and in the marketing, and they're at conventions and they're speaking on behalf of the company. And in order to do, to feel comfortable with an individual doing that, they really need to bring and exude that culture that any company represents. And so where I think it's a little bit more heavily weighted at the executive level, also because you're hiring fewer executives than you are, you know, a lot of, depending on the size of the company, you're typically hiring fewer executives and more sort of mid-level, early career folks.
Got it.
So I do think that there's an emphasis on culture fit and culture add at the executive level, and being mindful of that's important.
Okay. Okay. Excellent.
Now, to your point about how culture fit was one aspect, sort of a blanket generalization for people not getting jobs or being rejected from roles, I do agree with that. Like, that was really easy for people just to rely on the fact and say, oh, they weren't a culture fit, but weren't very specific as to providing feedback why that was, because of the murky waters that can lead you into technically. But yeah, I definitely know where you're coming from in that regard.
Okay, sounds good. I don't know how common it is. Let's say, I guess with any deal with two humans, there's potential for sort of things to not go according to plan. Oftentimes, I find it like with the HR teams that we have here, you hire people, but maybe they drop out before they actually come on board, or these other things. But when you're dealing with, let's say, at an executive level, and you have these interruptions, I'm thinking the impact is also far greater. Have you had any cases where, let's say, things didn't work out, and like at what point do you say, all right, we need to pull the plug on this, and this isn't going to work? And for me, what I'm thinking is, it's like you said, it's higher stakes when you hire an executive. So
Mm.
if you've made like a hiring error, or if there's an onboarding error, or if there's like a real just incompatibility,
Mm.
I'm thinking it's probably orders of magnitude more difficult to deal with because of, like you said, the responsibility, the weight, and you've shared power with this person now. And have you seen like based on your experience, like what is the correct way to recover from these kinds of mistakes? What's the correct way to pivot and yeah, basically recover, I guess.
Um, I think the answer to that is resilience, and really focusing on resilience and realizing that, like, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board again. There's no easy way to, break up and then go find somebody to jump into that role. I think at the executive level, our processes generally take a lot longer than your typical hiring process because of the amount of vetting and the amount of research that we do on the front end to mitigate that risk and to mitigate, the potential for a poor relationship. Now, that no relationship is always 100%. The amount of time that you have with a hiring manager or an executive or getting to know somebody, that relationship will continue to evolve. And it's important to, I think, focus on individuals that can communicate clearly and articulately what they want, what they need, to sort of reduce the creative conflict that happens. And I think creative conflict is important, and I think it's valuable. And I don't think everybody's going to always see eye to eye, and that's totally true. But we do a lot of upfront work as recruiters to try to eliminate as much of that potential as possible and to find the right individual who can get along with the executive team, or get along with said hiring manager. That always, that has not always been the case. We've seen people leave after 6 months or 3 months, and just because the working relationship was tenuous, or reorganizations happened and what they were hired to do one thing but ended up having to do another thing. That happens, and it's unfortunate from time to time. But um, I would say just any good recruiter needs to have a pipeline of talent. And so putting all your eggs in one basket with one executive is probably never a really smart idea, just because of that potential,
Got it.
for the breakdown of a relationship. And so this concept of pipeline where you have a couple people as backup just in case, and you're keeping a relationship going and you're keeping a relationship warm and you're checking in with people. That's what talent acquisition really is. It's relationship building, it's network building, and it's doing enough upfront work so that if somebody does, let's say candidate A does take the job, but candidate A, you know after 3 months says this was a mistake, I don't want to work here anymore, we can call up candidate B and call up candidate C, and they would want to have a conversation.
Okay.
So I think that's really important. So I think that's probably the better answer to your question, is to create a pipeline of talent so that if something happens, you have backups.
Got it. Got it. I kind of recall this sort of, I forgot, maybe it was a saying in mountain climbing or something. It's like two is one and one is none. So essentially, like, yeah, if you have one person, then yeah, it's essentially, I forgot what it, maybe it was like parachuting or something. Yeah, but yeah, I totally hear you on this idea of the pipeline. Um, in order to, I think in order to insulate your teams from disruptions in early onboarding, it's so essential for that to be there.
Hmm.
Coming back to an earlier point, just earlier, actually, it sparked a sort of a thought, which is this idea of context, right? This idea of past experience. When you're hiring an executive in an innovation company, especially like something like LinkedIn and Airbnb, and you're setting your goals on doing new things. You're setting your goals on constructing a new product, or like, actually, I think I might have answered my own question, but okay, let's go with it. When you're doing innovative work, but you're hiring a person who has, let's say, experience and context and years of experience, how transferable is it? I just thought of maybe what the answer was, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, Jason. How transferable is previous experience to, let's say, a hyper growth innovation company where things are moving like quickly across really new things? Like, let's say, you have an executive and maybe they're used to using paper, like actual paper, to
Yeah.
sort of document everything, but the teams all use like, they use like Trello and Google Docs and all this stuff. And
Hmm.
I mean, that's a trivial example, but more to, let's say, even fundamental core ideas of even what each person could do, and maybe just being able to think in a more up to date way. What's been your experience in seeing like that transferability of experience?
Yeah. I think in my what I've seen is that, and this goes back to an earlier point of like executives tending to classify themselves as experts in certain areas of a company or of a product. And so, for instance, a lot of people like to talk about how they really thrive in a 0 to 1 environment
Ah,
where you're sort of taking something like nothing, like an idea, and turning it into like the MVP, or the minimum viable product, right? So it's like super basic 1.0 version. They love to work fast and quick, and just, they are super creative. And so like that, a lot of people say they like to thrive in that sort of environment, or that 0 to 1 area. Then you have the folks that sort of go from 1 to 10. And these are the people that work in, you know, growth companies where there's already a product in place and you're looking to grow that product through marketing and sales and other sort of interesting digital strategies. And so that's a mix of sales and marketing and BD and product. And so you have a different sort of pace of um, business at that scale. And then you have sort of like what I would consider, the 10 and beyonds, where a company like LinkedIn, where you already have these really well established products and you're just kind of fine tuning and tweaking things to make that experience slightly better. So it's not like you're creating a brand new product. You're kind of just working on a product and um, keeping it shiny, if you will.
Got it.
So
Got it.
there's like a lot of different contexts in which an executive can thrive, that 0 to 1, that 1 to 10, that 10 plus, what have you. And so that I think is important. And I think that is transferable across companies, especially in tech.
Got it.
100%. I think that's incredibly transferable. And we go through the process of understanding what products have they started or created or helped build, and so like that is certainly something that we um, strive to get more information around, is building those products and what their processes are like in building those products. So
Excellent.
that is sort of the context which I think is transferable, certainly.
Got it. That's actually so helpful. I was cutting it in the wrong. I was, I think, classifying it the wrong way. I was thinking more of a domain, but you're thinking more of like a time, like a stage, actually. And yes, okay, I totally get it. That's actually really, really insightful.
Well, I do think that, anybody who's smart enough can transfer across industry. Like, I don't think industry specific knowledge is always of the utmost importance. And I think something that we've seen in the tech industry certainly is that reduces the amount of diversity that allows us to bring in talent. And so that's really tough when all we do is focus on other tech companies to hire from.
Mhm.
That's all in good, but that provides us with a really small talent pool in which to bring people or search for people. If you eliminate the industry barriers and you realize that a salesperson who's really good at selling Coca-Cola can probably sell as an account manager, paper products, the sales process is very much the same. It's just the product that's different,
That's right. That's right.
and
Uh,
and if you've become a director of sales at Coca-Cola, you certainly know what you're doing. And if you become a director of sales at, the Xerox company, then you definitely know what you're doing too.
that's right. I remember they hired Jonathan Mildenhall for CMO, right? Like for Airbnb, and that was that
A
actually.
while ago.
Yeah, that was yeah. I remember that was actually interesting because after Jonathan came in, I remember there was a more centralization of marketing at that point. I think in 2000, I think it was brought in around the same time, like just a few months before I left, actually. So I remember the marketing went all and got more centralized. Before, the marketing was sort of conducted by regional teams and local teams, but after that, uh, I could understand why now. I at the time when I was working, I was like, oh, that sucks.
Hmm.
We used to actually have so much more control of the marketing, but I could see at a certain point the brand becomes, it's something that could actually, how would I say, if you have a million expressions of your brand, they could go bad. So you did
Hmm.
need more tight control of that. And remember, they took far more marketing control and I think more from a centralized position. Okay, cool. No, that's good. It's good to know that different industries have that. I've got a question. This is kind of a long held belief I've had, and I want to pass it by you, Jason, for affirmation or for rebuttal. And that's the idea of, if you're working like at an executive level, it's just, is this really, you're working with people, right? Um, and knowing the people part is it like the most important thing? Like as a marketing executive, you're probably, as a CMO, you're probably not going to be doing any of the work yourself. You're going to be like selecting talent. You're going to be directing talent. You're going to be onboarding talent. You're going to be nurturing people basically. So does that kind of work become is that why it becomes more industry, less industry like constrained? Like if you're working with people, then sort of people are people
Yeah.
to it, right?
I think that's a good point, right? The higher up the ladder you go, the larger the team you end up managing depending on the company. And ultimately as a leader, you become somebody who sets the vision, the strategy, and you lead the team, right? And you manage resources. Like that is what you do as a large executive. You inspire, you create a culture, you lead the team, you do all of those things to make your team successful, whether it's through vision and strategy and things like that. You're probably doing less of the day-to-day work than a marketing manager would be working on a digital campaign. The executive or the CMO is not going to be doing that. He'll have the final say and he'll review it, but he's not the one actually putting that together. So I think that's important to know that, generally the people part of the role is really important when you're looking at an executive. Their ability to grow teams, have they turned around poor performing teams, how have they grown and scaled their own team, things like that. How have they managed through change? Like these are all really important things that tell me how an executive operates as a people leader, because that's important. But they also need to have that vision and that strategy, or else the team's not going to be able to be directed in any definitive way. So I think those are the really important keys when you're looking at an executive.
Got it. Okay. And post hire, I mean, who is we're hiring the executives to make our investors feel more confident in our company. Within the company, I guess, is it the CEO then that now handles all the executives, or is there sort of a what is it supposed to feel like? Like for that executive, do they like who's their mentor? Who's their or how how should that person be looked after their or who should look after that person after they've joined the company?
That's a good question. I think that's there's so many different ways to answer that depending on the size of the company and what the CEO is actually doing on a day to day, and how big the executive team is. Those are all, if the executive team is 3 people, that's a little bit smaller than an executive team that's 15 people. So some cases are a lot more manageable than others, and so sometimes there's a couple different tiers of reporting into the CEO, depending on that executive team. The CEO is the public face of a company. The CEO is the one who's getting up on the stage and, talking to his company about this is our strategy, this is where we're headed. And he's turning around and talking to the public about this is our strategy and this is where we're headed and we're really excited. He's the cheerleader of the company. And so, they have a lot of responsibility to the company, to the public facing audience. And sometimes that takes up a lot of work. And I would say, in my experience, the CEO is not really holding the hand of an executive. They expect an executive to come in and act as their own CEO, essentially, their little CEO of their own domain, and have that experience and not need to truly be mentored, so to speak. They're there to continue to work together through these sort of creative conflict and to shoot strategies and ideas back at each other and help each other grow and learn. But I would say probably less of a mentorship role.
Got it. Okay, that's pretty awesome. That's good to know. Okay, let me actually go over quickly to Ara. Ara, any questions on your side so far for Jason Silver?
Not so far, sir.
Okay, let's go to Alethea. Alethea, any questions on your side for Jason?
No, thank you.
Okay. I saw. Okay, I'll come back to this question. I saw on your LinkedIn you mentioned something about how to make the process of hiring, onboarding, and selection more efficient, and that's currently something that we're going through right now because I've noticed, and tell me if I'm wrong. I've noticed in the tech space, the median tenure is actually pretty short. Uh, like even at Airbnb, I think, which I thought was actually a pretty wonderful company. Um,
Hmm.
but I think even then people were working like maybe 2 3 years and then would move on. Um,
Hmm.
and I think Google's median tenure was a year and a month. So I mean, like you're dealing with this and applying the pipeline is one strategy. How much of that is normal in terms of dealing just with like a generation? How much of it is like your company sucks, and how much of it is just like, is it because things are growing, and and like you said, it's you're not the same company that the person joined like a year ago,
Hmm.
and you can't expect everybody to want to also change themselves into that way. Um, and
Yeah.
that's answering that question. How do you make your one is the climate normal for that, and two, how do you create processes that are efficient to sort of deal with that?
Yeah. So to answer the question, in the tech space in Silicon Valley, yes, that is very much the norm these days. Is average tenure being, like 22 months. It's kind of short of 2 years. People love to hop from one tech company to the next, mainly because, and I think there's a couple of different reasons why. I think people want to gain knowledge and learn new things, and hence they think they can do that at other companies, and learn how things are done. Uh, for me, that seems a little tough to do in a year or two. Um, and so I believe it's because of this boom in technology companies where they are just hiring, they've been hiring so rapidly that an individual can hop to a couple different companies, get more senior titles, also get more equity, and like all of these things. And it becomes pretty lucrative for them to just kind of hop jobs. So there's a financial aspect to people moving jobs so quickly, certainly. Um, and but you lose a lot of that culture. You lose a lot of that, the stuff you're trying to build by having people sort of jump and jump and jump. I do think that people move companies because they want to learn things. So that I think is also really important, and I think that's just pretty normal for. And now we're thinking, millennial generation and Gen Z, like our attention spans are that of a goldfish, like really, really small. And we're in front of our screens all day. And so like it's just a different way of working. And now with all of this happening, we're all sort of on Zoom calls and on these, video conferences, and the way that we work is going to be very different now. Um, and so I think that's also going to play into people moving jobs kind of frequently as well too. So I think those are things that I would mention. Um, but the best way to, I think, minimize the churn, or to be more efficient in your hiring or any sort of process, in regards to hiring with this, um, environment that you're dealing with, is it definitely falls back on culture and how you represent your company, because people will look for exciting opportunities to grow and learn, and they want to do it at cool companies, and so they want to find jobs that are exciting to them. um, and the hiring landscape's different, in the States than I'm sure it is in Bali. And I'm sure that, there's a lot of individuals that are just looking for work, period, and not necessarily have the opportunity or the luxury of, you know, oh, company A is way cooler than company B, so I'm going to join company A. Like, a job is a job for a lot of people. They need to put, food on the table, and that's really important. Um, and not to discount that at any point, but I think that the environments are slightly different, where in Silicon Valley, there's a little bit more of a trade-off that happens there, more so than in other environments. So that I think being able to, at least against your competitors, I think is important, is to showcase that your brand is better than your competitor's brand. And so for anybody looking for a similar type role, they understand that, your organization should be at the top of the list.
Got it. Got it. That's actually pretty key there. I get that. I remember I've had have had discussions with some of my friends at Facebook, and he's an engineer there, and he was actually pretty proud that he stuck with Facebook because he said at like a certain point, I think I brought him to one Airbnb when we had that block party
I've
at
heard about that.
yeah. So we had this block party, and he and I both agreed that yeah, Airbnb was a much cooler company than Facebook at the time. But then Facebook went through its sort of ups and downs. But he eventually said that yeah, he's been there for like I think wow, he's been there for like 8 years now. He said he was pretty happy staying in one place because he could actually sort of weather and grow. And I guess he's not really a millennial anymore. He's like kind of Gen X, but interestingly enough, this isn't the way executives think, right? Like executives don't think of like not at all, right?
No. So, as an executive recruiter, one of the biggest sort of red flags that we see is career jumpiness. So, if
Uh,
somebody goes to, is only spending 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years at a company in a career that lasts over 20 years, that's a red flag for us. That does not instill a lot of confidence in us that this person will want to stay with our company for a long time.
got it, got it, got it.
So I think being mindful of somebody's career history is really important. And at the executive level, growing with the company is more important than how many companies you've been at, or the name brand of your company. If you came in as a manager and slowly worked your way up over the course of 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years, and gained more responsibility and grew with your company, like that's looked at more highly than other individuals.
Got it. I've seen that actually in an interesting way. Like if I didn't have my own company, I think at certain points I probably would have just left and joined a different space because it does get hard and then it gets easy. I think it's constantly like a sequence of growth, destruction, and regrowth. What I've noticed is like even in one company, you're getting actually although the environment might feel the same, the coffee tastes the same, whatever. But when you change roles, you realize it's completely different. Like you might be a great engineer, but then if you become an engineering manager, it shifts to people now. You're dealing with people,
Mhm.
things, and you might be a great specialist, but when you switch to a manager, then you're changing. And then when you lead a division, then it changes again. Now you have to think about how to interact and interplay with other divisions to come together and form a product or a service. So I've seen
Mhm.
that actually that's yeah. It's probably not possible to actually grow unless you push through that pain and find how to. I feel like like an executive process or becoming an executive is a constant sort of birth, death, and rebirth. Right? You gotta be comfortable being a beginner again. Almost always, I found it.
Yeah, I mean, when you move into a management role, typically you've never managed a team before, and so somebody's taking a bet on you to learn those skills as you go, and I think that's really important. And every step in an executive's journey is, as you mentioned, continuous learning and taking on new responsibility that they typically haven't done before. But the beautiful part is if they succeed, they become really good at what they do. And then they can mentor and they can teach and they can, direct, share that knowledge and that trickles down and that instills confidence within an organization and within a team too. So that's I think very accurate.
Okay. And coming to like some of the final questions here, which is, you mentioned earlier that executives expect like higher pay, of course, but also equity in lieu of pay. What typically do you see go into executive packages? Like, is there an art to creating the package, or is it pretty standard generally?
No, typically that's an interesting question. Executive compensation is a bit of a Pandora's box, and sometimes also a black box. It's tricky because the more executive, the more senior you become, like the weirder some compensation deals, have these weird clauses in them, and like you have to roll with the punches. But generally, I would say an executive package consists of a base salary, an annual bonus target, and an equity stake. The equity is typically with late stage companies in the form of restricted stock units as opposed to stock options.
Right.
And the only difference between those two, the high level difference, is that restricted stock units vest over a period of time, whereas stock options, you can exercise them at any time. And so I think that's important to understand is those are probably the three biggest components that go into executive compensation. Now, I've seen and heard some pretty ridiculous things at some other companies in terms of like golden handcuffs and people not being able to leave because they trigger these weird clauses, and other companies, renegotiating compensation for the individual to stay at the company. But yeah, I would say those are the big three things to consider.
Okay. And
But
these.
also, I will say that equity is very much a technology thing. Is very much, geared towards the technology industry, and that's been a big player in Silicon Valley where equity is really important. That's not necessarily the case in pretty much any other, I would say, industry.
Okay.
There's a lot of companies that have what we call employee stock purchase programs. So if a company is public, an employee can purchase equity or stock of that company at a discounted rate, which is really nice. So let's say I'm a Microsoft employee. Microsoft, sells their stock for $200 a share right now. As an employee, certain periods of time throughout the year, they allow me as an employee to save up some money, and then I can buy that stock at a 15% discount. So that means I'm buying it at $185 a share versus $200 or $160 a share.
Right.
And that's free money to me, and hopefully that Microsoft stock will continue to grow.
Okay.
So that's one way that companies can retain employees too and think about equity. But from a compensation perspective, it's not always the case. But it is within the technology industry.
Got it. Yeah, I've noticed that outside of tech, people get really confused. What
Yes.
what does this mean? I don't get it. What's the option? Like, what is this tied to?
Mhm.
Okay, zeroing on that annual bonus target, is there a standard formula for because you have at an executive level, is everybody focusing on like the main bottom line? Like, is it like about profit, or a certain number of bookings or whatnot, or does each executive have their own sort of target to fulfill in order to get that annual bonus target?
Yeah, I think that's up to the leadership team to discern that. I think what you want to set out at the beginning of any year is sort of what are your main goals and what are your main measurements for success in a given year. Um, and bonus should be tied to you hitting those metrics or hitting those goals. So while an executive or anybody should have a bonus target saying you're going to, so for instance, an executive, let's say he gets a 40% bonus of his salary. Let's say his salary is 100,000 US dollars. And if you hit all of your targets this year and his team is involved in hitting those targets, he's going to get $40,000 at the end of the year because you've hit 100% of your goals.
Nice.
But if you haven't hit 100% of your goals, then you weighted accordingly. So while it's a 40% target, if you've hit 80% of your goals this year, then you're going to get a reduced amount in terms of bonus. So thinking about it, I think in that sliding scale manner is important.
Okay, got it.
And that also then motivates somebody to really kick ass if they want their bonus. Like they got to work for it. So
I've noticed that too. Like even at every level, I think of the company, having a bonus compensation system is truly it. Just curious, Jason, is that usually done internally, or is that done like creating compensation plans? Is that outsourced or is that in house?
compensation plans are made in-house.
Okay.
However, those sort of parameters are mainly created by HR and less the recruiting team. The recruiting team, we're the face of the external market. We're going to the external market, but it's really the HR team who's kind of coming up with these policies a little bit, or a compensation policy.
Okay.
So it's a partnership there.
Okay, great. And I guess the last question I have is if we want to talk to somebody at Airbnb who did hiring for non-executive employees and thought about how to structure, let's say, hiring, like the similar questions but for non-executives, do you have any recommendations? Who would be the best person to ask?
Yeah, I can email a couple names to you. Just some people, some alumni that I know that would be probably happy to chat.
Okay, that'd be great. We're looking to essentially do looking to learn from mentors. We're looking to streamline our hiring process, and what I've noticed is difficult about this, Jason, is all the material you look for hiring generally is how to get a job, right? And most of the material I've been finding, at least on the internet and whatnot, is it feels very clickbaitish and very general and very broad. It's like you just you gotta hire the right people. You gotta do the right thing, and none of it is specific or I feel like there's any expertise. And that's I don't know about like it. I think you're right. HR for me has been sort of sometimes a black box because I think, like you said, there are implications to like it's like the secret sauce of the company, and there could be legal consequences also if too much of this gets out. But understanding how to I find it like understanding how to hire is almost one of the most essential parts of building a great company, and to find how to hire correctly. I've hired a lot of great people, hired people that I wish I didn't hire before, and I feel like it's one of those things, unlike other parts in tech, where you can read documentation on it and there's pretty good explanation for how to do something. It's one of those things that I feel like it's a very oral tradition. You have to go and speak to somebody about it and understand it, and then learn from how they do it. And there's just not too much that I find that's written down. So I want to say thank you for passing on this tradition with us, so that we can save a lot of time, I guess, and agony.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think if there's any way that I can help, I'm happy to be to work with you guys. I think being able to share that knowledge is really important, no matter what. And so we can continue to have the conversation. I can introduce you to some folks and see how that continues to evolve.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. Let's go over to Ara for final thoughts or comments. Any thoughts on your side?
Okay, I would like to say thank you, Jason, for allocating time to talk to us. It's just interesting for me that I looked up at your LinkedIn profile, and it's makes me think that I think you started in the beginning to specifically be a recruiter for executive positions. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. There was a bit of an echo. Do you mind repeating yourself? And maybe Jing, putting yourself on mute. I think that might be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I saw it, your background a little bit, and it seems like you are, since in the very beginning you started as an HR that is specifically recruit executive level. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that is actually very interesting for me. I thought at first to become executive recruiter for executive position is needs to have like experience in, I mean, the very beginner level. So in that sense, maybe can you give me reasons on why are you starting with a recruiting an executive, and then how exactly that you started in that level instead of starting from the general recruitment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, recruiting is one of those careers where, nobody ever, as a kid in school raises their hand and says, I want to be a recruiter when I grow up. That never happens. And it was one of those things that when I graduated from university and when I graduated from college that I, was looking around to see, what careers were available. And it was through network connections that I found this job. So it was a very small company at the time, which was willing to take a bet on me to help me learn and to help me grow. So they kind of said, okay, you're young, you're just out of school, but we want to teach you as much as possible so that you can grow into this kind of position. And with recruiting, as with any career, like it's not necessarily sort of a step by step sort of growth trajectory or road, if you will. So as a recruiter, you don't need to start as a junior recruiter to become an executive recruiter. Um, Executive recruiting in and of itself is very much almost a different profession than regular recruiting because of the amount of research in executive recruiting, the relationship building that goes into executive recruiting versus regular recruiting, which is what I call volume recruiting. You're hiring lots and lots of people, whereas executives are only hiring very few. So you need to get it right. So it's really important. So it's very research heavy. So I found a company that was just getting started and was looking to bring on people that they could teach and grow and to stay with that company for a while. And so I stayed at this company in my first job for 3.5 years, learning as much as I can. And then being able to then go to another company like LinkedIn to continue to become more well-rounded. So something that I've really taken personal and professional pride in is becoming a well-rounded recruiter and not just focusing on executive recruiting. And it is a little bit weird for that to be the first step in a recruiting career, but it happens. It's totally doable. But typically people could start at an agency, start in a junior recruiting role and move into executive recruiting. That is a perfectly fine career path as well.
Okay, very well, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. Very nice question. All right, let's go over to Alethea. Alethea, any questions on your part at this moment?
Not really. Thank you very much for sharing, though.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, that pretty much is it. So the last thing that I'd like to do, Jason, is we'll take a photo, a screenshot photo of you, and we'll post it up on our LinkedIn. I'll ask one of our team here to write the post. Okay,
Cool.
all right. So just a thumbs up, and 1, 2, 3. Okay, done. Since we're here, would you like to plug Silver Project Group and tell us a little bit more about your company?
Sure. And then I want to hear more about your company because I want to come visit and then I want to stay at your properties and then I just want to hang out. Like, are you kidding me? So I've been to Bali. Last time I visited was in 2017. So it was a while ago. But I was on the island for close to 2 weeks and I was in Ubud, Canggu, and Uluwatu, and it was just such an incredible experience. It was so much fun. So I'd love to go back when all this COVID stuff settles down.
Let us be your host. We'll look after you.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'm liking this partnership already. I'm really liking this. This is great.
Okay.
I'll work for accommodation. How about that?
That'd be fun. That would be perfect. I would just have you stay by and just have like lunch and dinner with you and learn about recruiting. That would satisfy us. Anytime
All
you're
right.
just look us up. We always look after our friends, and
Yeah.
we'll hook you up. Make sure we have accommodations in Ubud, Uluwatu, and Canggu actually. So those three areas are our
Fantastic.
specialty. Been doing this
And
for about
did I see that you guys have like properties in Italy too? Is that
not yet. So
like what is that?
part of our trajectory right now is to, like I said, research and development. So the marketing team is trying now to acquire Italian properties as
I
part
saw
of
that.
yeah.
Okay.
So we're going through multiple iterations of it because and we're the first part was we talked to his name was Powell. He was the Central Europe at Central and Eastern Europe market manager, and he gave some ideas about how to get into Italy. Actually, it was very fascinating. So the marketing team was working on just iterating on ads, and at first they were doing Italian specific ads, and then eventually they pivoted to like don't be regional, but be more focused on the problem that property owners are facing. So then that could be a little bit more broad. So so far no success yet, but we're trying, and
Okay.
we have time to try and get it done. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's a learning process, I guess, right?
So then how big is your company right now then?
Okay, so let's see. In terms of revenue, I think it was we're bringing about 3 million of bookings every year.
Wow.
Number of properties was 180 plus. Employees was I think currently we're at about 22.
Okay.
Before COVID, we're close to about 29, 28.
Oh wow.
We've been filling in mostly with interns right now. So like Alicia,
Hmm.
our group is coming in. There's four of them. So yeah, that's we're hoping that we can actually do for maybe hotels and hospitality organizations what Amazon did for websites. That's our global goal. So if we can take this idea of you don't need to actually hire a bunch of people, manage a bunch of people to staff your hotel, you can just buy services from Bukit Vista, then you can get yourself re restarted in this new economy faster, cheaper,
Hmm.
and at less risk. So that's this concept that's worked pretty well so far in Bali, but I think it's an uphill road. Most of it is just getting people to understand it, and we're still working on getting breakthroughs on that. But we're approaching from every direction. Hiring is one of the directions that we're thinking about.
Hmm.
Are there sort of competencies that need to be hired to fill in the gaps, and are there competencies that can be learned? So
Yeah.
that's what Buca Vista does. Um,
Awesome.
yeah,
Well, what we specialize at Silver Project Group. So basically, it's a consultancy that I put together to work with growth stage companies that are just kind of getting off the ground, as well as startups, but companies that are just smaller and haven't necessarily thought about hiring and having that be top of mind. And so what my expertise really is helping a company think about what is that process, what are the steps included, how do you vet for this certain type of candidate, what competencies, as you mentioned, are you looking for, how do you build out an interview process that flushes all of that information out, how
right.
do you do that at scale depending on how many roles you're actually going to be looking for. So what I tend to provide as a service is consulting and advising for individuals that need to build processes, need to build sort of the structure behind how to recruit. And so that's sort of my bread and butter, as well as everything ad hoc to actually doing search work for them to, staying on as an advisor and things like that. So
Wow.
that's sort of what Silver Project Group does.
Okay, that sounds like something we could have further discussions about. That sounds like something we might do pretty soon. So okay, all right. Thank you for explaining that. And how does it feel to like start your own business now?
It's refreshing. You know, my father is an eye doctor. He runs his own practice. He's always taught us the importance of kind of being your own boss. And I think that's really important. And I've worked for two really big companies previously, and they've been great. Don't get me wrong, the experience has been invaluable, but there's something really exciting about sort of building something you're like on your own, and building something that's your own, and kind of moving at your own speed, and that's really cool. And so it's been a lot of fun, and it's early days here, but I'm excited to see where this will go.
Okay, well, like as one entrepreneur to another, I wish you lots of luck, and I think you've had a very illustrious career, and you can see probably things that most people wouldn't be able to see, actually. So
Oh, you're making me blush.
okay. Okay. Well, Jason, please look us up when things get better. We will definitely embrace you in a warm hug of hospitality.
Fantastic.
Get out to Bali again, and yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom and time.
Yeah. Of course, guys. Have a great rest of your day. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Same to you.
Bye, guys.
Okay, take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.